Have you ever wondered why so many well-intentioned plans go wrong? Why companies with brilliant people end up making terrible decisions? Or why systems designed to improve our lives often make them more complicated? The answer, surprisingly often, lies in a single, powerful force: incentives. We're surrounded by them. Bonuses at work, grades at school, likes on social media, even the little rewards in a video game. They're all designed to do one thing: shape our behavior. The logic seems simple enough. Reward a certain action, and people will do more of it. It feels rational, efficient, and it's the bedrock of how we run our organizations and digital lives. But here's the twist. Again and again, these incentives produce results that nobody wanted. Instead of making things better, they quietly distort our priorities, narrow our judgment, and encourage actions that look smart up close but are damaging from a distance. And the strangest part, this isn't about bad people with bad intentions. It's a glitch in the system itself, a structural problem that affects all of us. To understand why incentives go sideways, we need to look beyond simple motivation. It's not just about what we want. It's about how we adapt to the systems we live in. First, incentives are powerful signals. They do more than just reward you. They tell you what matters. When a company ties a bonus to a specific metric, say, customer response time, that metric suddenly becomes the most important thing in the world. Every other aspect of customer service, like the quality of the solution or the friendliness of the interaction, starts to fade into the background. It's not that those things aren't important, it's just that they aren't being rewarded. This signaling effect is often stronger than the reward itself. People don't just work harder for a bonus, they change how they define success. What gets measured becomes what feels important. In this way, incentives shape our perception long before they shape our actions. They act like a filter on reality, highlighting some things and making others invisible. This leads to the second big problem: local rationality. We all respond to the incentives right in front of us. We make choices that are good for us, choices that lead to a reward, a promotion, or just a good performance review. From our individual perspective, these choices are perfectly logical. You'd be crazy not to make them. But the distortion happens when everyone in the system starts making these same locally rational choices. Imagine a team of software developers who are all rewarded based on how many lines of code they write each day. Individually, it makes sense for each developer to write as much code as possible. But what happens to the system as a whole? The code might become bloated and inefficient. Quality drops, and long-term maintenance becomes a nightmare. No single person made a bad decision, but the collective result is a mess. This isn't a failure of intelligence. It's a predictable outcome when individual incentives clash with system-level goals. Incentives also have a powerful narrowing effect on our judgment. Good judgment is about weighing trade-offs, considering context, and balancing the short-term with the long-term. But when a specific metric is tied to a reward, our thinking gets compressed. The question is no longer, what's the right thing to do here? It becomes, what will move the metric? This shift is subtle. It doesn't feel like you're losing your judgment. In fact, decisions might even feel clearer and faster. But over time, all the important things that can't be easily measured, creativity, collaboration, ethical considerations, get pushed aside. What can't be measured or rewarded becomes less visible, and eventually, it becomes irrelevant. This brings us to one of the most famous principles in management. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Systems need feedback to work, and we use measurements as proxies for reality. They simplify complex things into signals we can understand. But when we tie incentives too tightly to these proxies, the proxy itself becomes the goal. People start managing the measurement, not the underlying reality it was supposed to represent. We often call this gaming the system, but it's rarely about cheating. It's a natural response. If teachers are rewarded based on student test scores, they will, rationally, teach to the test. They aren't necessarily making students smarter or more curious. They are optimizing for the proxy, and in doing so, a gap inevitably opens up between what we're measuring and what actually matters. Another key reason incentives backfire is that they are designed for a static world, but people are adaptive. We learn, we experiment, and we figure out the most efficient way to get the reward. This adaptive behavior is a sign of intelligence, but it's also the source of countless unintended consequences. As people adapt, their behavior starts to drift away from the system's original purpose. The typical response from designers is to add more rules or refine the incentives. making the system even more complex without ever solving the root problem. Most incentive structures also have a built-in bias toward the short term. Rewards that are frequent and immediate grab our attention. Daily or weekly metrics have a much bigger influence than goals that might take months or years to achieve. This isn't a personal flaw, it's a structural feature. A system that gives you constant feedback will naturally encourage you to focus on immediate gains. Over time, this leads us to sacrifice long-term resilience, learning, and sustainability for short-term wins that look good on a dashboard. The true cost of this trade-off only becomes clear when the environment changes and we find ourselves unprepared, and we can't ignore the emotional side of this. Incentives don't just work through logic, they work through feelings. They create pressure, anxiety, pride, and fear. When our performance is constantly measured and compared to others, our self-worth can get tangled up with the rewarded outcomes. The system's priorities become our personal priorities, so much so that we might keep chasing them even without the external reward. In our modern world, automation pours gasoline on this fire. In automated systems, the feedback is instant, constant, and precise. Your ranking, your score, your performance hit, all updates in real time. This tight loop between action and feedback speeds up our adaptation. We start reacting reflexively to the signals, with no time for thoughtful judgment. In these environments, incentives can completely take over our decisions. You'd think that systems with distorted incentives would eventually correct themselves. If the results are bad, surely people would notice and fix it, right? But in reality, these systems are incredibly resistant to change. Why? Because the incentives themselves shape how we see the problem. We interpret failures through the very same metrics that cause them. Any information that falls outside the incentive structure is ignored. It's a feedback loop, where the flawed logic reinforces itself. Even as the ship is sinking, incentives create a powerful illusion of control. They make it seem like we can precisely steer human behavior. So when things go wrong, the default response isn't to question the whole approach. It's to tweak the incentive, add another rule, or create an even more complex system. But the problem isn't that the incentive wasn't designed well enough. The problem is the core belief that incentives can ever be a substitute for human judgment. Organizations love to say their incentives reflect their values, but in practice, incentives often crush them. When faced with a choice between doing what is rewarded and doing what is right, the reward usually wins. Not because people are bad, but because the system punishes them for deviating. Over time, the company's stated values become empty words on a wall. The real culture isn't found in mission statements. It's found in what gets rewarded. So what's the solution? It starts with restraint and humility. It means accepting that metrics are imperfect, that people will adapt in unpredictable ways, and that every incentive will have side effects. Instead of trying to micromanage behavior, we should focus on designing systems that limit the damage incentives can do. This might mean slowing down the feedback. A yearly review instead of a daily leaderboard creates space for reflection. It might mean decoupling measurement from reward. Some data should exist simply to help us understand, not to drive behavior. Not everything that matters can, or should, be incentivized. In the end, incentives are just one part of a much larger system that includes culture, feedback, and human judgment. They aren't a magic lever we can pull to get the results we want. Behavior follows structure. Incentives do work, but not in the simple way we think. They work quietly, by shaping our attention, simplifying our judgment, and pushing us toward local optimization. This distortion is not a failure of character, it's a consequence of design, an understanding that allows us to shift our focus from trying to motivate people to designing better, wiser, and more humane systems. Because a system doesn't behave according to its stated values. It behaves according to what it rewards. Thanks for watching. If this video made you think, consider subscribing for more content that explores the hidden structures shaping our world. See you in the next one.